At 24, Isla Martinez thought she knew what exhaustion felt like. She'd pulled all-nighters in college, worked double shifts at her first marketing job, and pushed through hangovers that felt like small apocalypses. But this was different. This was a bone-deep weariness that sleep couldn't touch, paired with joint pain that felt like her body was staging a rebellion against her very existence. What she didn't know yet was that she was about to embark on a 3-year journey through medical gaslighting, family doubt, and professional dismissal that would nearly break her spirit, before ultimately leading to a diagnosis that would validate everything she'd been feeling and transform not just her health, but her entire understanding of advocacy, resilience, and the power of refusing to be silenced. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Isla Martinez had always been the type of person who said yes. Yes to weekend hiking trips in the Colorado Rockies. Yes to training for the Denver Half Marathon with her roommate Casey. Yes to staying late at Thompson & Associates Marketing to perfect client presentations. Yes to helping her younger brother Dylan move apartments for the 3rd time in 6 months. Her life in Denver felt like a carefully orchestrated symphony of productivity and purpose. She graduated from Colorado State with a marketing degree, landed a solid entry-level position at a respected firm, and was slowly but steadily climbing the corporate ladder. Her studio apartment in the trendy Reno district might have been small, but it was hers, complete with a Murphy bed she was particularly proud of, and a small balcony where she grew herbs that she actually used in cooking. "You're like a golden retriever in human form," her best friend Maya Chen would tease her during their weekly brunches at their favorite spot on Larimer Street. "You literally cannot sit still, and you want to make everyone happy." Maya wasn't wrong. Isla's calendar was a colorful maze of work meetings, gym sessions, volunteer commitments at the local animal shelter, and social gatherings. She served on the planning committee for her company's annual charity gala, maintained a successful Instagram account documenting her Colorado adventures, and, somehow, still found time to FaceTime her parents in Phoenix twice a week. Her relationship with her family was the kind that made her friends slightly envious. Her mother, Carmen, was a high school guidance counselor who had taught Isla that problems had solutions if you worked hard enough to find them. Her father, Roberto, owned a small but thriving auto repair shop and had instilled in her the belief that persistence could overcome any obstacle. Dylan, 2 years younger and currently pursuing a master's degree in environmental engineering, looked up to his big sister with an admiration that was both touching and occasionally overwhelming. "Mija, you need to slow down sometimes," Carmen would say during their video calls, noting the slight fatigue in Isla's eyes that had become more apparent over recent months. "You're burning the candle at both ends." But Isla thrived on the pace. She loved the feeling of accomplishment that came with a packed schedule successfully executed. She loved being the person others could count on, the one who remembered birthdays, organized group trips, and never missed a deadline. At work, she'd quickly establish herself as a reliable team player with a knack for understanding client needs. Her supervisor, Janet Kowalski, had already hinted at a promotion to account manager within the next year. Her specialty was working with small businesses looking to expand their digital presence, and she found genuine satisfaction in helping entrepreneurs tell their stories more effectively. Her romantic life was refreshingly uncomplicated. She'd been casually dating Marcus Thompson, no relation to her company's Thompson, for about 8 months. He was a software developer with an easy laugh and a shared love of craft breweries and weekend adventures. Nothing too serious, but comfortable and fun. "I like how you don't need me to entertain you," Marcus had told her one evening as they watched the sunset from Red Rocks Amphitheater. "You've got your own whole life going on. It's attractive." Physical activity was Isla's preferred form of stress relief. She had discovered rock climbing in college and had continued pursuing it in Colorado's abundant outdoor playground. Her apartment was decorated with photos of herself grinning at the top of various peaks, arms raised in victory, her long dark hair usually escaping from whatever ponytail or braid she had attempted that morning. The gym was her second home. She had a routine: strength training on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays,
cardio and flexibility work on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and outdoor adventures on weekends. Her gym friends knew they could count on her to show up, to spot them during heavy lifts, and to maintain the kind of positive energy that made even the most grueling workout feel manageable.
But lately, something had been shifting in ways so subtle that Isla initially dismissed them as temporary stress responses. The morning stiffness that used to disappear after her first cup of coffee now lingered through her commute. The afternoon energy crash that could usually be remedied with a quick walk around the block seemed to be deepening into something more persistent. She started needing 2 alarms instead of 1, then 3. The snooze button became her enemy and her closest ally. "I think I'm just adjusting to winter," she told Maya one particularly difficult morning when she'd arrived at brunch 15 minutes late, something that would have been unthinkable just months before. "You know how seasonal depression hits some people? Maybe I'm just finally susceptible to it." Maya raised an eyebrow, but didn't push. Isla was notorious for analyzing and solving her own problems. If she thought it was seasonal, she'd probably already researched light therapy lamps and vitamin D supplements. The truth was, Isla had researched those things. She'd also started taking a daily multivitamin, switched to a sunrise alarm clock, and increased her coffee intake. She'd scheduled a routine physical with Dr. Peterson, her primary care physician since moving to Denver, and had blood work done that came back perfectly normal. "Everything looks great," Dr. Peterson had said cheerfully, reviewing her results. "Your vitamin levels are fine, your thyroid is functioning normally, and your overall health markers are excellent. You're probably just dealing with some work stress. Maybe consider taking a vacation." A vacation sounded lovely, but it didn't explain why her joints felt like they belonged to someone 30 years older. It didn't explain why she had started experiencing what she privately called invisible bruises, tender spots that hurt when pressed, but show no visible sign of injury. It didn't explain the strange flu-like aches that would appear without warning and disappear just as mysteriously. Most concerning was what was happening to her beloved physical activities. Rock climbing sessions that used to energize her now left her feeling depleted for days. Her running pace had slowed significantly, and she found herself taking rest days not because her training schedule called for them, but because her body simply wouldn't cooperate. "Maybe I'm overtraining," she confided to her gym buddy Derek after cutting a workout short because her knees felt unstable and painful. "I've been pushing pretty hard for a couple of years. My body might be telling me to back off." Derek, a personal trainer with a degree in kinesiology, looked skeptical. "You're one of the most body-aware people I know, and your training hasn't been excessive. Are you sure nothing else is going on?" That question haunted Isla more than she wanted to admit, because deep down, in a place she wasn't ready to examine too closely, she was beginning to suspect that something else was indeed going on. Something that normal blood work and routine physicals might not catch. Something that was slowly but steadily changing not just how she felt, but who she was capable of being. The woman who said yes to everything was finding herself in the unfamiliar position of having to say no, first to herself and soon to everyone else. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The morning that changed everything started like any other Tuesday in March. Isla's alarm went off at 6:15 a.m., and she reached over to silence it with the automatic precision of someone who'd been following the same routine for 2 years. But when she tried to swing her legs out of bed, her body simply refused to cooperate. It wasn't the usual morning stiffness she'd grown accustomed to over the past few months. This was different. A deep, throbbing pain that seemed to radiate from every joint simultaneously, as if someone had replaced her synovial fluid with molten lead overnight. Her fingers felt swollen and clumsy as she fumbled for her phone, struggling to grip it properly. "Come on," she whispered to herself, a mantra she'd developed for these increasingly difficult mornings. "Just get moving. It will work itself out."
But 20 minutes later, after a shower so hot it nearly scalded her skin and still feeling like she was moving through concrete, Isla realized this wasn't something that was going to work itself out. Getting dressed became an ordeal. Her favorite blazer felt impossibly heavy. Buttoning her shirt required multiple attempts. Even sliding her feet into her low-heeled work shoes sent shooting pains up her legs. The drive to work was a white-knuckled affair. Gripping the steering wheel hurt her hands, and every small bump in the road seemed to jar her entire skeletal system. By the time she arrived at Thompson & Associates, she was running 30 minutes late, a professional sin she'd never committed in her entire career. "Rough night?" asked Kevin, the office coordinator, as Isla practically limped through the reception area. "Something like that," she managed, forcing what she hoped was a convincing smile. The day only deteriorated from there. The client presentation she'd been perfecting for weeks felt disjointed and unfocused. She found herself struggling to articulate ideas that had seemed crystal clear just days before. Her usual sharp attention to detail abandoned her completely. She caught herself making basic errors in emails, forgetting scheduled calls, and losing her train of thought mid-sentence during conversations. By lunch, Janet Kowalski appeared at Isla's cubicle with a concerned expression that made Isla's stomach clench with anxiety. "Can we chat in my office for a minute?" Janet asked, her tone carefully neutral in the way that never meant anything good. Janet's office was a shrine to successful marketing campaigns. Framed advertisements, client testimonials, and awards lined the walls. Normally, Isla found the space inspiring. Today, it felt like a tribunal. "I'm going to be direct because I respect you, Isla. You've missed 2 client calls this week. Your presentation this morning was uncharacteristic, and frankly, you look exhausted. Is everything okay at home?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Isla had always prided herself on her professionalism, on the clear boundary between her personal life and her work performance. The idea that her mysterious physical struggles were now affecting her career felt like a fundamental violation of who she was. "I've been dealing with some health issues," she said carefully, the words feeling strange and insufficient. "Nothing serious, just trying to figure out what's going on." Janet's expression softened slightly. "Have you seen a doctor?" "Yes, and everything came back normal. I think it might be stress-related." "Well, that's something we can work with," Janet said, leaning forward with the problem-solving energy that had made her successful. "Why don't you take a few personal days, maybe see a specialist? The company's health insurance is excellent. Use it. And consider this a friendly heads-up rather than anything formal. But, Isla, I need you to know that the promotion we discussed is contingent on maintaining your current performance standards." The words hit Isla like a physical blow. The promotion she'd been working toward, the recognition she'd earned through 2 years of dedication and excellence, was suddenly in jeopardy because of symptoms she couldn't explain or control. That evening, instead of her usual post-work gym session, Isla found herself on Maya's couch, fighting back tears of frustration and confusion.
"I feel like I'm losing my mind," she confessed, accepting the cup of chamomile tea Maya pressed into her hands. "It's like my body has turned against me and I can't even explain what's wrong because nothing shows up on tests." Maya, who worked as a graphic designer and had always been Isla's voice of reason, listened without judgment. "What exactly does it feel like?" "Like I'm wearing a suit made of concrete," Isla said, surprised by how accurately the metaphor captured her experience. "Everything hurts, but not in a way I can point to and say, this is injured. It's more like I'm constantly recovering from a flu that I never actually had. And I'm so tired, Maya. Not sleepy tired, bone tired. Like my body is running on emergency power all the time. That sounds horrible, Maya said simply, and something about the straightforward acknowledgement made Isla feel more validated than she had in weeks. The worst part is that I look fine, so when I try to explain it, I can see people thinking I'm being dramatic or making excuses. Even I started wondering if it was all in my head. When did this start? That's just it. I don't know. It was so gradual at first. Looking back, I think it might have been building for months, but I kept explaining it away. Stress, overtraining, seasonal depression, not enough sleep. But now it's affecting my work, and Janet basically threatened my promotion. Maya was quiet for a moment, then pulled out her laptop. Let me ask you something. Have you been Googling your symptoms? Isla laughed despite herself. Are you kidding? I've practically earned a medical degree from WebMD at this point, but everything I find either sounds too extreme or too vague. Chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, autoimmune disorders. It's all just lists of symptoms that could apply to anyone having a bad week. What did your doctor say about those possibilities? Dr. Peterson said that conditions like fibromyalgia are diagnoses of exclusion, meaning they only consider them after ruling everything else out. He wants to see how I feel after taking some time to rest and reduce stress. If it doesn't improve, he'll refer me to a rheumatologist. And how long is that supposed to take? He suggested giving it 6 weeks. Maya was incredulous. 6 weeks? While you're potentially losing your job? The question crystallized something that had been nagging at Isla since leaving Janet's office. The luxury of time. Time to rest, time to wait and see, time to try lifestyle modifications was a privilege she couldn't afford. Her symptoms weren't conveniently paused while she figured them out. They were actively dismantling the life she'd built. That night, lying in bed and staring at the ceiling, Isla made a decision that would prove to be the first of many difficult choices ahead. She wasn't going to wait 6 weeks to seek specialist care. She wasn't going to risk her career on the hope that rest would magically resolve symptoms that seemed to be intensifying rather than improving. She was going to take control of her medical care in a way she'd never had to do before, advocating for herself in a healthcare system that seemed designed to dismiss young women's pain as psychological rather than physical. What she didn't know yet was that this decision would launch her into a medical odyssey filled with skeptical doctors, expensive tests, and diagnoses that ranged from anxiety to attention-seeking behavior. She had no way of knowing that she was about to enter a world where being a credible patient required skills she'd never needed to develop. But she was about to learn them all. The next morning, despite joints that screamed in protest and fatigue that made every movement feel like swimming through syrup, Isla called her insurance company to find an in-network rheumatologist who could see her as soon as possible. The earliest appointment with Dr. Sarah Chen is in 3 months, she said cheerfully. 3 months? Isla repeated, her voice cracking slightly. She's very popular, but I can put you on the cancellation list if you'd like. As Isla hung up the phone, she realized that her ordeal was just beginning.
3 days after being placed on Dr. Chen's waiting list, Isla made a decision that would have seemed unthinkable to her former self. She called in sick to work for an entire week. Not to rest, as Dr. Peterson had suggested, but to wage a full-scale campaign for her health. Armed with a notebook, her laptop, and a determination that surprised even her, Isla transformed her small apartment into a medical research command center. Her dining table disappeared under printouts of medical journal articles, insurance documents, and carefully organized lists of symptoms, tracked by date, severity, and potential triggers. This is what I do for clients, she told herself, applying her marketing skills to a very different kind of campaign. I research their problems, identify their target audience, and create a strategy to get results. The target audience, in this case, was the medical establishment. The strategy was to become the kind of patient who couldn't be dismissed. Her first breakthrough came from an unexpected source, a former college roommate named Samantha Rodriguez, who had commented on one of Isla's increasingly rare Instagram posts, asking if she was feeling okay. "You haven't posted any hiking photos in weeks. That's not like you." Instead of deflecting with her usual "just busy with work" response, Isla found herself typing out a detailed explanation of what she'd been experiencing. Within an hour, Samantha had called her. "Isla, what you're describing sounds exactly like what I went through 3 years ago, before I was diagnosed with ankylosing spondylitis." Ankylosing what? It's an autoimmune condition that affects your spine and joints. The early symptoms are exactly what you're talking about: morning stiffness, fatigue, joint pain that moves around. I saw 5 doctors before anyone took me seriously. Samantha's words felt like the first ray of sunlight Isla had seen in months. Here was someone who understood the specific quality of her exhaustion, the particular way her joints ached, the frustration of looking healthy while feeling terrible. "How did you finally get diagnosed?" "I started keeping incredibly detailed records: pain levels, locations, activities that made it better or worse, photos of any swelling. I brought everything to appointments organized in binders. I also learned the medical terminology and came prepared with specific questions. Basically, I made it impossible for doctors to blow me off." And it worked? Eventually. The key was finding the right doctor, a rheumatologist who specialized in inflammatory conditions in young women. Most doctors don't expect to see autoimmune diseases in healthy-looking people in their 20s. After hanging up with Samantha, Isla felt energized for the first time in weeks. She had a direction, a plan, and most importantly, proof that she wasn't imagining her symptoms. She spent the next 2 days researching rheumatologists throughout the Denver metro area, reading reviews, checking credentials, and looking for specialists who mentioned experience with young patients or hard-to-diagnose conditions. She created a spreadsheet ranking them by expertise, location, and earliest available appointments. Dr. Marcus Hoffman at Denver Arthritis Associates had an opening in 6 weeks, 2 months sooner than Dr. Chen. Dr. Lisa Park at National Jewish Health could see her in 4 weeks. But the name that kept appearing in patient testimonials and medical articles was Dr. Jennifer Walsh at University of Colorado Hospital, who apparently had a reputation for taking complex cases seriously. Dr. Walsh's office couldn't see her for 2.5 months, but when Isla mentioned she was experiencing severe symptoms that were affecting her ability to work, the scheduler paused. "Let me talk to the doctor about a phone consultation. Sometimes Dr. Walsh will do a preliminary assessment over the phone if the case sounds urgent."
2 days later, Isla found herself on a 45-minute phone call that changed her entire approach to medical care. "Tell me about your symptoms," Dr. Walsh said, "but I want you to be very specific. Don't say, 'I hurt all over.' Tell me exactly where, when, and how it feels." For the next 30 minutes, Isla detailed everything she'd been experiencing, referring to the meticulous notes she'd been keeping since her conversation with Samantha. She described the morning stiffness that lasted for hours, the way her pain seemed to migrate from joint to joint, the fatigue that felt qualitatively different from normal tiredness. "How long have you been tracking these symptoms?" Dr. Walsh asked. "About 2 weeks systematically, but I can recreate patterns going back several months based on my calendar and photos." "That's excellent preparation. Most patients come in saying they hurt sometimes and can't provide specifics. Based on what you're describing, I'd like to see you sooner rather than later. Can you come in next Friday at 2 p.m.? I had a cancellation." Isla nearly dropped the phone. "Yes, absolutely. In the meantime, I want you to continue tracking your symptoms, but I'm also going to order some preliminary blood work. There are specific markers I want to check that your primary care doctor might not have included in a standard panel." When Isla hung up the phone, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months: hope. Not just hope that she would feel better, but hope that she would be believed. The blood work appointment at the hospital lab was an education in advocacy. When the technician seemed surprised at the extensive list of tests Dr. Walsh had ordered, Isla found herself defending the necessity instead of apologizing for taking up time. "These are all ordered by my rheumatologist," she said firmly. "She's investigating possible autoimmune conditions." It was the first time she'd spoken with such confidence about her medical situation, and the technician's attitude shifted immediately from skepticism to professional courtesy. While waiting for her appointment with Dr. Walsh, Isla began making other changes to accommodate her new reality. She researched ergonomic improvements for her workspace and asked Janet if she could work from home 2 days a week to reduce the physical stress of commuting on her worst days. "I can maintain my productivity while managing some health issues," she explained, presenting a detailed proposal showing how she could meet all her responsibilities remotely. "This would actually allow me to work more effectively during flare-ups rather than calling in sick." Janet, perhaps influenced by Isla's professional approach to the request, agreed to a trial period. Isla also had difficult conversations with the people closest to her. She told Marcus about her symptoms and the impact they were having on her energy levels and social activities. "I want to be upfront about what's going on," she said during what was supposed to be a casual dinner date. "I don't know what I'm dealing with yet, but it's affecting my ability to be spontaneous or keep up with our usual activities." Marcus's response surprised her. "I've actually been wondering if something was wrong," he admitted. "You seemed like you were forcing yourself to keep up with things lately. I appreciate you telling me." The conversation with her parents was harder. Carmen immediately went into problem-solving mode, researching specialists in Phoenix and offering to fly to Denver to help with appointments. "We just want you to get better, mija," Carmen said during their video call. "Don't worry about anything else." But Isla was learning that getting better might be more complicated than any of them had imagined. The night before her appointment with Dr. Walsh, she organized all her documentation: symptom journals, photos of any visible swelling, her calendar marked with good days and bad days, a timeline of when different symptoms had appeared, and a list of specific questions she wanted to ask. Looking at the evidence she'd compiled, Isla realized that what she'd been experiencing wasn't random or psychosomatic. There were clear patterns, triggers, and progressions that pointed to something systemic and real. For the first time since her symptoms had begun, she felt prepared for whatever diagnosis might be coming. She had done her research, advocated for appropriate care, and refused to accept dismissal or delay. What she didn't anticipate was that even with all her preparation, the medical journey ahead would test her newfound advocacy skills in ways she couldn't imagine. But she was ready to fight for answers.
Dr. Jennifer Walsh's office at University of Colorado Hospital was nothing like the sterile, impersonal spaces Isla had grown accustomed to. The walls displayed certificates in rheumatology and immunology, alongside artwork that seemed chosen to be calming rather than clinical. Dr. Walsh herself was younger than Isla had expected, perhaps in her early 40s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and an energy that suggested she genuinely enjoyed solving medical puzzles. "I've reviewed your preliminary blood work," Dr. Walsh began, settling across from Isla with a thick file. "Your inflammatory markers are elevated, specifically your ESR and CRP levels. That tells me your body is definitely fighting something, which validates what you've been experiencing." For a moment, Isla felt vindicated. Here was objective proof that her symptoms weren't imaginary. But Dr. Walsh's next words tempered her relief. "However, elevated inflammation is like a smoke alarm. It tells us there's a fire somewhere, but not where or what kind. We need to do more detective work." What followed was the most thorough physical examination Isla had ever experienced. Dr. Walsh checked her joints systematically, noting areas of tenderness and swelling that previous doctors had missed or dismissed. She examined Isla's skin for rashes, felt for enlarged lymph nodes, and performed tests Isla had never heard of. "I'm going to order additional blood work," Dr. Walsh explained. We'll test for specific autoimmune markers, ANA, anti-CCP, RF factor, and several others. I also want to get imaging done. Sometimes inflammatory conditions show changes in bones and joints before they're visible or palpable. The next 3 weeks became a blur of medical appointments and procedures. MRI scans that required lying perfectly still for 45 minutes while her joints screamed in protest. X-rays from multiple angles, blood draws that left her arms looking like a pincushion. Each test carried the promise of answers, but also the fear of what those answers might reveal. Meanwhile, her symptoms continued to evolve in ways that made her previous discomfort seem mild by comparison. She began experiencing what she privately called flare-ups, periods of intense pain and stiffness that could last anywhere from a few hours to several days. During these episodes, simple tasks became monumental challenges. Getting dressed required strategic planning. She had to lay out clothes the night before, choosing items without complicated fasteners. Showering became an endurance test that left her exhausted. Opening jars, turning doorknobs, and typing at work all became sources of frustration and pain. The unpredictability was perhaps worse than the pain itself. Good days gave her false hope that she was improving, only to be followed by bad days that reminded her how much her life had changed. She started carrying a small notebook to track patterns: what she ate, how much she slept, weather changes, stress levels, searching for any variable that might explain why some days were bearable and others weren't. At work, despite her arrangement to work from home twice a week, her performance continued to suffer. Janet called her in for another meeting, this one less friendly than the last. "I need to be direct with you, Isla." Janet closed her office door with an ominous finality. The Henderson campaign was concerning. They felt the creative brief lacked your usual attention to detail, and frankly, I agree. Isla's stomach dropped. The Henderson campaign had been assigned during one of her worst flare-ups, when brain fog made complex thinking feel like trying to see through frosted glass. She'd powered through it, but apparently not successfully. "I understand you're dealing with health issues," Janet continued, "but I can't keep covering for missed deadlines and subpar work. The promotion we discussed is off the table for now. If things don't improve significantly in the next month, we'll need to discuss other options." The threat was clear, and Isla left the meeting feeling like her professional identity was slipping away along with her health. That evening, she found herself crying in Maya's kitchen, the first time she'd completely broken down since this ordeal began. "I feel like I'm disappearing," she sobbed. "The person I was, the one who could handle anything, who people could count on, she's gone, and I don't know who's taking her place." Maya handed her a box of tissues and sat down beside her. "You're not disappearing. You're adapting to something incredibly difficult. There's a difference. What if they never figure out what's wrong with me? What if I lose my job? What if this is just my life now?"
"Then you'll figure out how to live it," Maya said simply. "But let's not borrow trouble. You have the best rheumatologist in the state working on this. Give the process time." Time, however, was becoming Isla's enemy in more ways than one. The test results from Dr. Walsh's extensive workup came back mixed. Some autoimmune markers were positive, others negative. The imaging showed mild inflammation in several joints, but nothing definitive. "This is actually quite common in the early stages of autoimmune conditions," Dr. Walsh explained during their follow-up appointment. "Your body is clearly mounting an inflammatory response, but the specific pattern isn't clear yet. Sometimes these conditions take time to fully declare themselves." "How much time?" Isla asked, thinking about Janet's ultimatum. "It could be months, possibly longer. In the meantime, I'd like to start you on a low-dose anti-inflammatory medication and see how you respond. Sometimes the response to treatment can be diagnostic." The medication, methotrexate, came with a list of side effects that read like a medical textbook: nausea, fatigue, increased infection risk, liver damage, and hair loss.
Isla stared at the prescription bottle, realizing that she was about to enter another phase of uncertainty. "The side effects sound worse than my symptoms," she told Dr. Walsh. "I understand the concern, but untreated inflammation can cause permanent joint damage. We need to be proactive." Starting methotrexate felt like crossing a threshold she couldn't uncross. She was no longer someone dealing with mysterious symptoms. She was someone taking medication for a chronic condition, even if that condition didn't have a name yet. The side effects hit within the first week. The nausea was manageable with anti-nausea medication, but the fatigue was overwhelming. She found herself needing naps during lunch breaks, struggling to stay alert during afternoon meetings, and falling asleep on her couch most evenings by 8 p.m. Marcus, who had been patient and supportive through her initial symptoms, began showing signs of strain. "I feel like I never see the real you anymore," he said one evening when Isla had to cancel their dinner plans due to a sudden flare-up. "You're always tired, always hurting, always dealing with some medical appointment or medication side effect." His frustration was understandable, but it stung. "This isn't exactly fun for me either," Isla replied, trying to keep the defensiveness out of her voice. "I know, and I'm trying to be supportive, but it's been months and you don't seem to be getting better. Maybe you need to consider that this might be psychological. Stress can cause physical symptoms." The suggestion that my pain might be psychological, coming from someone I cared about, felt like a betrayal. It echoed doubts she'd fought to overcome and undermined the medical validation she had worked so hard to achieve. "My inflammatory markers are elevated," she said quietly. "That's not psychological." "But the doctors can't figure out what's causing it. Maybe if you saw a therapist, worked on stress management." "I don't need therapy to fix my immune system, Marcus." The conversation ended badly, and Isla realized that her condition was claiming not just her physical health and professional life, but her relationships as well. Even people who cared about her were struggling to understand the reality of living with invisible illness. That night, alone in her apartment and feeling more isolated than she had ever had in her life, Isla made a decision that would prove crucial to her survival. She was going to find others who understood what she was going through. She spent hours online searching for support groups, patient forums, and communities of people living with undiagnosed autoimmune conditions. What she found was both heartbreaking and encouraging. Thousands of people, mostly women, sharing stories remarkably similar to her own. For the first time in months, Isla didn't feel alone. The online support group Isla discovered was called Invisible Warriors, a community of over 3,000 members dealing with undiagnosed or difficult-to-diagnose chronic conditions. Their private Facebook group became her lifeline during the weeks that followed, a place where phrases like, "I look fine, but I'm not," and "nobody believes me," weren't met with skepticism, but with understanding nods from people living the same reality. Through the group, Isla learned about concepts she'd never encountered in any medical appointment. Medical gaslighting, the systematic dismissal of patients' symptoms, particularly women's pain. Zebra patients, those with rare conditions that most doctors weren't trained to recognize. Spoon theory, a way of explaining the limited energy reserves that chronic illness creates. But she also learned something more disturbing. Many members had been fighting for diagnoses for years, some for over a decade. Their stories followed eerily similar patterns. Initial symptoms dismissed as stress, depression, or attention-seeking behavior. Years of bouncing between specialists, mounting medical debt, lost jobs, broken relationships, and a healthcare system that seemed designed to exhaust patients into giving up rather than provide answers. "The trick," wrote a member named Jennifer, who'd been citing lupus symptoms for 8 years before getting diagnosed, "is to never give up, even when giving up seems like the only sane option left." Isla was beginning to understand what Jennifer meant. 6 weeks into taking methotrexate, her inflammation markers had improved slightly, but her symptoms seemed to be worsening. The medication that was supposed to help was making her feel like she was living in a constant state of mild flu. Her hair began falling out in clumps during showers. Her hands developed a tremor that made typing, essential for her marketing work, increasingly difficult. The final blow to her professional life came on a Thursday morning in early June. Isla arrived at the office to find Jeanette waiting at her cubicle with HR representative Patricia Williams, a woman whose presence never signaled good news. "We need to talk," Jeanette said, her voice carrying the careful neutrality that preceded bad news. In the conference room, Patricia spread out paperwork with the efficiency of someone who'd done this many times before. "Isla, we appreciate everything you've contributed to Thompson & Associates, but we need to discuss your employment status." The words Isla had been dreading were delivered with corporate politeness. Her work quality had declined significantly. She'd missed too many deadlines. Client feedback had become increasingly negative. The company needed someone who could perform at full capacity, and despite accommodations, Isla was no longer meeting those requirements. "We're prepared to offer you a severance package, and of course you'll be eligible for COBRA health insurance coverage." Isla listened to the details in a kind of shocked silence. After 2.5 years of dedication, excellent performance reviews, and professional growth, she was being let go because of a medical condition she hadn't asked for and couldn't control. "Can I ask," Isla said when Patricia finished, "if there's any possibility of medical leave instead of termination? I'm working with specialists, and there's a chance I could—" "We considered that option," Jeanette interrupted gently. "But honestly, Isla, we don't know how long this will take to resolve, or if it will resolve. We can't hold a position indefinitely." The conversation lasted another 20 minutes. But Isla stopped processing most of it. She signed the severance papers with hands that shook from medication side effects and walked out of the building that had been her professional home, carrying a cardboard box with her few personal belongings. Sitting in her car in the parking lot, Isla called Dr. Walsh's office and asked to speak with the nurse. "I just lost my job because of my symptoms. I need to know, is there anything else we can try? Any other tests, treatments, specialists? I can't keep living like this." The nurse, a woman named Carol, who'd become familiar with Isla's case, was sympathetic but realistic. "Dr. Walsh is doing everything she can with the information available. Sometimes these conditions take time to fully manifest. I know that's not what you want to hear." "How much time? Months? Years?" "There's no way to predict that. But Dr. Walsh wants to see you next week to discuss adjusting your medication dosage." That evening, Isla faced the practical reality of unemployment while chronically ill. Her severance would cover her expenses for about 2 months. COBRA insurance would cost nearly $600 per month, money she wouldn't have once her severance ran out. Her apartment lease had 6 months remaining. Her medication costs, even with insurance, were substantial. The phone call to her parents was one of the hardest conversations of her life. "Mija, what do you mean they fired you?" Carmen's voice carried a mixture of outrage and disbelief. "That has to be illegal." "They didn't fire me because I'm sick," Isla explained wearily. "They fired me because I can't do my job effectively anymore. It's legal." "Then you'll move back home," Roberta said firmly. "We'll take care of you until you get better." The offer was tempting, but the idea of returning to Phoenix felt like admitting defeat. More importantly, all her medical care was in Denver. Starting over with new doctors would mean months of delays while her current treatment was already showing some promise. "I want to stay here," she said, "at least until we know more about what I'm dealing with." "Then we'll help with expenses," Carmen said. "You focus on getting well." Her parents' support was a lifeline, but it came with the weight of dependence that Isla had never experienced as an adult. At 24, She was moving backward financially and professionally because of circumstances completely beyond her control. The relationship with Marcus, which had been strained for weeks, finally reached its breaking point the following weekend. He'd come over to help her pack up her work materials, but the conversation quickly turned to her future plans. "Have you thought about what you'll do now?" he asked, surveying the chaos of her apartment, medication bottles on every surface, medical paperwork scattered across her dining table, energy bars and easy-to-prepare meals stockpiled because cooking had become too exhausting. "Focus on getting better," Isla replied. "Find work I can do from home, maybe freelance marketing consulting." "But what if you don't get better? What if this is just how you are now?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Marcus had been thinking the same thing Isla tried not to think about during her worst moments, that this might be her permanent reality. "I don't know," she admitted. "I'm taking it one day at a time." "That's not really a plan, Isla, and honestly, I don't know how to be with someone who doesn't have a plan." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I care about you, but this isn't the relationship I signed up for. You're not the same person I started dating, and I don't think you're going to be again." Marcus's honesty was brutal, but not entirely wrong. The woman he'd begun dating, energetic, adventurous, socially active, had been replaced by someone whose biggest victory some days was managing to shower and prepare a simple meal. The transformation hadn't been her choice, but it was real. "So what do you want me to do? Pretend I'm not sick to make you more comfortable?" "I want you to acknowledge that this affects me too. I've been trying to be supportive, but I feel like I'm in a relationship with your illness, not with you." The conversation ended with Marcus leaving, and both of them understanding that he wouldn't be coming back. Another loss to add to a growing list that already included her job, her physical capabilities, her financial independence, and her sense of identity. That night, Isla posted in the Invisible Warriors group for the first time. "Lost my job today, lost my boyfriend. Taking medication that makes me feel terrible to treat a condition nobody can name. Some days I wonder if everyone who thinks this is psychological might be right. How do you keep fighting when you're not even sure what you're fighting?" The responses came within minutes. Dozens of messages from people who'd faced similar losses, similar doubts, similar moments of wanting to give up. But they also shared something else. Stories of eventual breakthroughs, diagnoses that came after years of searching, treatments that worked, and lives rebuilt on new foundations. "The hardest part," wrote a woman named Susan, "is the part right before the breakthrough. You can't see it coming, but it's there." Isla wasn't sure she believed in breakthroughs anymore, but she was still breathing, still fighting, still refusing to accept that her story was over. 3 months after losing her job, Isla's life had settled into a routine she never could have imagined. Her days revolved around medical appointments, careful energy management, and freelance marketing projects she could complete during her good hours. She'd moved to a smaller, cheaper apartment in a less trendy neighborhood, trading her beloved downtown loft for a ground-floor unit that didn't require climbing stairs on her worst days. The financial strain was constant, but manageable with her parents' help and the modest income from her consulting work. More challenging was the social isolation. Many of her friendships had naturally faded as she became unable to participate in the activities that had once defined her social life. Maya remained a steadfast friend, but even she sometimes seemed overwhelmed by the reality of Isla's limitations. It was through the Invisible Warriors group that Isla learned about Dr. Rebecca Hassan, a rheumatologist at National Jewish Health who specialized in complex autoimmune cases that other doctors had given up on. Several group members had mentioned her name with an almost reverent tone. She was the doctor who'd finally diagnosed their lupus after 5 years of searching, who'd identified their rare form of arthritis when everyone else said it was fibromyalgia, who'd taken the time to see patterns that others had missed. "She doesn't take insurance," warned Lisa, one of the group's most active members, "but she spends 2 hours with each patient orders tests other doctors won't think of, and she doesn't give up on complicated cases. 2 hours. Isla tried to imagine what it would feel like to have a doctor's undivided attention for 2 hours instead of the rushed 15-minute appointments that had become standard. The cost was substantial, $800 for the initial consultation, but she'd been saving every dollar from her freelance work for exactly this kind of opportunity. Dr. Hassan's office was different from any medical facility Isla had visited. Located in a converted house near the hospital, it felt more like a professor's study than a clinical setting. The walls were lined with medical journals and textbooks, and Dr. Hassan herself, a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and intense, intelligent eyes, greeted Isla personally rather than sending in a nurse first. "I've reviewed all the records Dr. Walsh sent over, but I want to hear your story from the beginning, in your own words. Don't leave anything out. Sometimes the details that seem insignificant are actually the most important clues." For the next hour and a half, Isla told her story more completely than she'd ever been able to before. Dr. Hassan listened without interrupting, taking notes, and occasionally asking specific follow-up questions that showed she was processing every detail. "Tell me about your family history, not just the obvious things. Any relatives with autoimmune conditions, unusual illnesses, early deaths from unknown causes." Isla had been asked about family history before, but never with such specificity. As she thought more deeply, she remembered things she'd previously dismissed as unimportant. "My grandmother on my mother's side had terrible arthritis, but she was never formally diagnosed with anything specific. She just said her joints hurt. And my Aunt Elena, my mom's sister, she's always been exhausted and has complained about joint pain, but she's never seen a doctor about it. She just says it's part of getting older." "How old is Elena?" 43. Dr. Hassan made a note. "What about skin issues in your family? Rashes, sensitivity to sun, unusual scarring?" Again, Isla found herself remembering details she'd never connected to her own symptoms. "My mom gets these weird rashes sometimes when she's in the sun too long, more than just sunburn, like raised, itchy patches. And Elena has these scars on her hands that she says came from nothing, just appeared one day. Have you ever noticed similar skin reactions?"
Isla paused, thinking. "Actually, yes. Last summer I got this strange rash on my arms after hiking. I thought it was poison ivy, but it didn't look like poison ivy, and it took weeks to go away." Dr. Hassan spent the next 30 minutes conducting a physical examination more thorough than any Isla had experienced. She examined her joints not just for current inflammation, but for subtle signs of damage. She looked at her skin under a magnifying glass, checking for scarring, discoloration, and texture changes Isla hadn't even noticed. "I want to order some additional blood work," Dr. Hassan said finally. "There are some newer, more specific autoimmune markers that weren't available when your other tests were done. I also want to get genetic testing to look for certain predispositions." "Genetic testing for what?" "There are several autoimmune conditions with strong genetic components that can present exactly like what you're describing. The symptoms often appear in young women, they're frequently misdiagnosed or dismissed, and they can take years to develop the classic presentations that most doctors recognize." As Dr. Hassan explained the test she wanted to run, Isla felt something she hadn't experienced in months: genuine hope based on expertise rather than wishful thinking. This doctor was looking at her case through a completely different lens, one that took into account her family history, her demographic profile, and the specific pattern of her symptoms. "One more thing," Dr. Hassan said as the appointment wound down. "I want you to keep a very specific type of symptom diary for the next 2 weeks. Instead of just tracking pain levels, I want you to note joint stiffness duration in the mornings, any skin changes, energy levels throughout the day, and how you respond to movement and rest." Dr. Walsh had me tracking symptoms too. "This is different. I'm looking for specific patterns that might reveal the underlying mechanism of your condition." The blood work took place the following week, and the waiting period that followed was both agonizing and oddly peaceful. Isla had done everything she could do.
She'd found the most qualified specialist available, provided complete information, and submitted to every test available. The outcome was no longer in her control. She spent the waiting time focusing on the things she could control. She started doing gentle yoga, specifically designed for people with autoimmune conditions, following videos she found through the Invisible Warriors group. She began meal prepping anti-inflammatory foods, turning the dietary changes from a chore into a form of self-care. Most importantly, she started writing. Not just symptom diaries, but reflections on her journey, the people who'd supported her, and the lessons she'd learned about resilience. 14 days after the blood work, Dr. Hassan's office called. Dr. Hassan would like to see you as soon as possible to discuss your results. Can you come in tomorrow afternoon? Is everything okay? Isla asked, her heart rate spiking. The doctor prefers to discuss results in person, but she wanted me to tell you that she has some important information to share with you. That night, Isla barely slept. She'd been waiting for answers for almost a year, and the possibility that she might finally have them was both thrilling and terrifying. She thought about all the people who'd dismissed her symptoms, all the time she doubted herself, all the losses she'd endured while fighting for validation. The next afternoon, walking into Dr. Hassan's office, Isla felt like she was approaching the end of one chapter of her life and the beginning of another. Whatever she was about to learn would change everything: her treatment options, her prognosis, her ability to plan for the future. Dr. Hassan was waiting with a file thick with test results and an expression that managed to be both serious and reassuring. Isla, she said, gesturing for her to sit down, I have answers for you.
Dr. Hassan opened the thick file and pulled out several sheets of laboratory results, each one marked with highlighted sections and handwritten notes in her precise script. The silence in the room felt charged with possibility, and Isla found herself holding her breath without realizing it. Your genetic testing came back positive for HLA-B27, Dr. Hassan began, pointing to a specific line on the lab report. This is a genetic marker present in about 8% of the general population, but found in 90% of people with a specific type of inflammatory arthritis called ankylosing spondylitis. Isla's mind immediately flashed back to her conversation with Samantha months earlier, the college roommate who had mentioned the same condition. Ankylosing spondylitis, she repeated slowly, trying to process the weight of finally having a name for her experience. Combined with your elevated inflammatory markers, your symptom pattern, your family history, and your response to methotrexate, I'm confident this is what you've been dealing with, Dr. Hassan continued. Ankylosing spondylitis, or AS, is a chronic inflammatory condition that primarily affects the spine and sacroiliac joints, but can also involve peripheral joints, tendons, and other organs. But I haven't had back problems, Isla said, confusion mixing with relief. My pain has been mostly in my hands, knees, shoulders. That's exactly why AS in young women is so often missed or misdiagnosed, Dr. Hassan explained. The classic presentation that most doctors learn about, severe lower back pain in young men, represents only one pattern of the disease. Women, especially young women, often present with peripheral joint involvement first. The spinal symptoms may not develop for years, if at all. Dr. Hassan pulled out a medical journal article she'd printed and highlighted. There's been significant research in recent years showing that AS affects women differently than men, but most physicians weren't trained with this information. Your case is textbook for the female presentation of AS, but it's a textbook that many doctors haven't read. The validation was overwhelming. For nearly a year, Isla had been fighting to prove that her symptoms were real, that something was genuinely wrong with her body. Now she had not only confirmation, but an explanation for why so many medical professionals had missed or dismissed her condition. What does this mean for treatment? Isla asked, trying to shift from emotional processing to practical planning. The good news is that we have excellent treatment options for AS now, Dr. Hassan replied. The methotrexate you've been taking was a reasonable first-line approach,
But for AS, we have much more targeted therapies available. I'd like to start you on a class of medications called TNF inhibitors, specifically a drug called adalimumab. Dr. Hassan explained that TNF inhibitors were biological medications that targeted the specific inflammatory pathways involved in AS. Unlike the broad immune suppression of methotrexate, these drugs could control the inflammation while allowing the rest of the immune system to function normally. The difference in quality of life can be dramatic, she said. Many patients see significant improvement within weeks of starting treatment. But there was a catch, and Dr. Hassan's expression grew more serious. These medications are expensive, about $6,000 per month without insurance. Given that you're currently uninsured, we'll need to work with the pharmaceutical company's patient assistance program and potentially apply for compassionate use coverage. The mention of insurance sent a chill through Isla's momentary euphoria. She'd been so focused on getting a diagnosis that she hadn't fully considered the financial reality of treating a chronic autoimmune condition while unemployed. "How long would it take to get approved for assistance programs?" she asked. "Usually several weeks to a few months. In the meantime, I can provide you with samples to start treatment immediately. I don't want you to lose any more time." Dr. Hassan spent the next hour explaining AS in detail, how it progressed, what symptoms to watch for, lifestyle modifications that could help, and the importance of staying physically active despite pain and fatigue. She provided Isla with printed materials, resource websites, and contact information for AS support organizations. "One more thing," Dr. Hassan said as the appointment neared its end. "Given your family history, I'd recommend that your mother and aunt consider being screened for AS. The genetic component is strong, and early detection can prevent significant joint damage." Walking out of Dr. Hassan's office, Isla felt like she was experiencing the world with new senses. The Denver sunshine seemed brighter, the mountain views more magnificent, even the traffic noise somehow less irritating. She had a diagnosis, she had a treatment plan. Most importantly, she had validation that everything she had endured over the past year had been real, necessary, and worthwhile. Her first call was to Maya, who answered on the first ring as if she'd been waiting by her phone. "I have a diagnosis," Isla said without preamble. "Ankylosing spondylitis. It's a real condition with a real treatment." Maya's squeal of excitement was so loud that Isla had to hold the phone away from her ear. "Oh my God, Isla, tell me everything!" As Isla explained Dr. Hassan's findings, she felt herself using medical terminology with confidence for the first time. She wasn't just a patient with mysterious symptoms anymore. She was someone with a specific condition that had a name, a prognosis, and a treatment protocol. The conversation with her parents was even more emotional. Carmen broke down crying when Isla explained that the joint pain Elena had been experiencing might be the same condition. "All those times I worried you were working too hard, that you needed to slow down," Carmen said through tears. "You were fighting an autoimmune disease, and we didn't know." "Now we do know, and we can do something about it," Isla replied. Roberto, ever practical, immediately shifted into problem-solving mode. "What do you need? Money for treatment? Help with insurance applications? I'll research everything tonight." That evening, Isla posted an update in the Invisible Warriors Facebook group. "After 11 months of searching, I finally have answers. Ankylosing spondylitis, confirmed by genetic testing and clinical presentation. Starting TNF inhibitor therapy next week. To everyone still fighting for diagnosis, don't give up. The right doctor with the right expertise makes all the difference." The responses poured in within minutes. Congratulations, celebration, and gratitude from people who understood exactly what this moment meant. But mixed in with the supportive messages were also requests for Dr. Hassan's contact information, questions about symptoms, and stories from people whose own diagnostic journeys were just beginning. Isla realized that her experience, painful as it had been, had given her something valuable, the knowledge and perspective to help others navigate the same system that had initially failed her.
She began responding to individual messages, sharing what she'd learned about self-advocacy, documentation, and finding specialists who took complex cases seriously. 3 days later, Dr. Hassan's office called with news that the pharmaceutical company had expedited her application for patient assistance. She'd been approved for a full year of adalimumab at no cost while she worked on getting insurance coverage through the state's high-risk pool. "This is incredibly unusual," the nurse explained. "Dr. Hassan must have written a very compelling letter on your behalf." Starting the new medication required another leap of faith. Unlike the oral methotrexate, adalimumab was administered through self-injection every 2 weeks. The first injection took place in Dr. Hassan's office, with a nurse teaching Isla the proper technique and monitoring her for any immediate reactions. Some patients notice improvement within days, others take several weeks, but Dr. Hassan has had excellent results with AS patients on this medication. As Isla drove home with her first month's supply of medication carefully stored in a small cooler, she reflected on the distance she had traveled, not just the physical miles from Dr. Hassan's office, but the emotional and psychological journey from dismissed patient to empowered advocate. She thought about Janet, who had questioned her work performance without understanding what she was battling. She thought about Marcus, who had suggested her symptoms were psychological. She thought about Dr. Peterson, who had attributed her pain to stress and recommended rest. None of them had been malicious, but none of them had possessed the specific knowledge needed to recognize AS in a young woman. The system hadn't failed because of individual cruelty, but because of structural limitations. Doctors trained on outdated information, insurance policies that restricted access to specialists, and a medical culture that still struggled to take women's pain seriously. But she had persevered. She had refused to accept dismissal, had fought for proper evaluation, and found the expertise she needed. The diagnosis was just the beginning, but it was the foundation upon which she could rebuild everything she'd lost and perhaps help others avoid the same struggle.
6 weeks after her first adalimumab injection, Isla woke up on a Tuesday morning and realized something extraordinary had happened. She had slept through the night without waking up in pain. More remarkably, when she got out of bed, her joints moved smoothly, without the grinding stiffness that had defined her mornings for over a year. Standing in her bathroom, looking at her reflection in the mirror, Isla barely recognized the person staring back at her. Gone were the dark circles under her eyes, the pallor that had accompanied months of chronic inflammation, and the defeated posture that had become her default stance. For the first time in 15 months, she looked like herself again. The transformation wasn't just physical. The brain fog that had made complex thinking feel impossible had lifted dramatically. Her energy levels, while not fully restored to her pre-illness baseline, were sufficient for full days of activity without the crushing exhaustion that had forced her into survival mode for so long. By her 3rd month on adalimumab, Isla felt ready to rebuild her professional life. But instead of returning to traditional marketing roles, she decided to channel her experience into something more meaningful. She launched her own consulting practice, specializing in healthcare marketing for patient advocacy organizations and medical practices that served underrepresented communities. Her first major client was the National Ankylosing Spondylitis Foundation, who hired her to develop a campaign raising awareness about AS in women and young adults, the exact population whose symptoms were most likely to be dismissed or misdiagnosed. "Who better to craft this message than someone who lived it," said Dr. Patricia Morrison, the foundation's medical director, during their initial consultation. "Your story represents thousands of patients who struggled to get proper diagnosis and care." The campaign, which Isla titled Invisible No More, combined her marketing expertise with her personal understanding of what patients needed to hear. Instead of focusing on medical statistics and clinical presentations, the materials highlighted real patient stories, practical advice for self-advocacy, and resources for finding qualified specialists. The campaign's centerpiece was a series of videos featuring young women with AS sharing their diagnostic journeys. Isla appeared in one of them, sitting in the same apartment where she'd spent some of her darkest days, explaining how she'd learned to document her symptoms, research specialists, and persist despite repeated dismissals. "The most important thing I learned," she said directly to the camera, "is that you know your body better than anyone else. When something is wrong, trust that instinct and keep fighting for answers, even when people tell you it's all in your head." The video went viral within weeks, shared thousands of times across social media platforms and patient support groups. Isla's inbox filled with messages from women sharing similar stories: years of dismissed symptoms, delayed diagnoses, and the relief of finally being believed. More importantly, she began receiving messages from people who had watched the video and successfully advocated for specialist referrals, genetic testing, and appropriate treatment. Her story was helping others avoid the prolonged struggle she had endured. 6 months after starting treatment, Isla felt confident enough to begin dating again. She'd learned valuable lessons about relationships during her illness, particularly the importance of partners who could adapt to life's unexpected challenges rather than abandoning ship when things got difficult. She met David Chen, no relation to Dr. Walsh, through her work with the AS Foundation. He was a physical therapist who specialized in helping people with autoimmune conditions maintain mobility and strength. Their first conversation lasted 3 hours, covering everything from inflammatory disease management to their shared love of Colorado's outdoor recreation opportunities. "I'm impressed by how much you know about AS," David said during their first official date. "I have it," Isla replied, simply, watching his face for any sign of the discomfort or retreat she'd learned to expect. Instead, David leaned forward with genuine interest. "That explains your expertise. How long since diagnosis?" His matter-of-fact response was revelatory. Here was someone who understood chronic illness not as a character flaw or relationship burden, but as a medical condition that required management and accommodation, no different than diabetes or high blood pressure. As their relationship developed, Isla discovered the profound difference between dating someone who saw her illness as a problem to be solved versus someone who simply accepted it as one aspect of who she was. David never suggested that positive thinking might cure her AS, never questioned whether her fatigue was real, and never made her feel guilty for needing to modify plans during flare-ups. The 1-year anniversary of her diagnosis arrived in early autumn, and Isla marked it by doing something she couldn't have imagined 12 months earlier. She climbed to the summit of Mount Evans, one of Colorado's 14ers. The hike took her twice as long as it would have before her illness, and she had to rest more frequently than her hiking companions, but she made it to the top under her own power.
Standing at 14,271 feet above sea level, looking out over the Rocky Mountain landscape that had first drawn her to Colorado, Isla felt a profound sense of completion. Not because her journey with AS was over. She understood now that managing a chronic condition was a lifelong commitment, but because she had successfully integrated her illness into a life that felt full and purposeful again. Her relationship with her family had deepened through the experience. Carmen had indeed been tested for AS and found to carry the HLA B27 genetic marker, though she hadn't yet developed symptoms. Elena, however, had been diagnosed with early-stage AS and started treatment before developing significant joint damage. "If you hadn't fought so hard for your own diagnosis," Elena told Isla during a family gathering in Phoenix, "I might have suffered for years without knowing what was wrong. You probably saved my joints." The ripple effects of Isla's advocacy continued expanding. Through her work with patient organizations, she helped develop educational materials for medical schools about recognizing AS in women. She consulted with hospitals on improving their rheumatology referral processes. She even worked with insurance companies to create more efficient pathways for accessing specialty care and expensive medications. Her former colleague Janet reached out 18 months after Isla's termination, having learned about her successful consulting practice through mutual connections in Denver's marketing community. "I owe you an apology," she wrote in a carefully worded email. "I realize now that we didn't handle your medical situation appropriately. What you accomplished despite being seriously ill is remarkable, and I should have recognized that at the time." Isla's response was gracious but honest. "I don't think anyone understood what I was dealing with, including me. But I learned that having an invisible illness means becoming your own advocate, and that served me well in everything I've done since." 2 years post-diagnosis, Isla's life bore little resemblance to her pre-illness existence. But she had come to see this as evolution rather than loss. Her work was more meaningful, her relationships were deeper and more authentic, and her understanding of resilience and self-advocacy had applications far beyond healthcare. She spoke regularly at medical conferences about the patient experience of diagnostic delay, appeared on podcasts about chronic illness advocacy, and continued expanding her consulting practice to serve organizations working to improve healthcare access and quality. The physical symptoms of AS remained a daily reality. Some morning stiffness, occasional flares that required rest and medication adjustments, and the ongoing need for regular monitoring and treatment. But these challenges no longer defined her existence or limited her possibilities. On quiet evenings in her apartment, Isla sometimes reflected on the person she had been before AS, energetic and capable, but perhaps naive about the complexities of health and healthcare. The woman she had become possessed a different kind of strength, the knowledge that she could survive and thrive even when her body betrayed her, that she could navigate complex systems and advocate effectively for herself and others, and that setbacks could become foundations for helping others avoid similar struggles. Her story, which had begun with dismissed symptoms and medical gaslighting, had transformed into something larger than personal triumph. It had become a roadmap for others facing similar journeys, proof that persistence and self-advocacy could overcome even systemic failures in healthcare. Most importantly, Isla had learned that being believed, truly believed, was not just about medical validation. It was about reclaiming agency over her own narrative, refusing to let others define her experience, and using her hard-won knowledge to ensure that fewer people would have to fight the battles she had fought. The woman who had once said yes to everything had learned to say no when necessary, to prioritize her health without apology, and to use her voice not just for herself, but for an entire community of patients who deserve better care, earlier diagnosis, and the fundamental right to be believed when they said they were in pain. And in that transformation, she had found not just healing, but purpose.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.